Hello, everyone. Welcome to the January 30 edition of the SIG API Machinery meeting. It's a pretty short-looking schedule today, so we'll just get started. Jordan, it looks like you have the two main items.
Yeah, so these were mostly kind of a PSA for people who had not been following these, if they wanted to take a look at the work that the first one has been done and the second one we would like to do. If there's nothing else on the agenda, I can dive into a little more detail.
I do want to hear about Antoine's server-side apply, so leave time for him.
Okay. So for the first one, we are looking to make progress with the admission webhook feature. It's been in beta for a few releases. We've gotten some good feedback about various people's experiences trying to use it, friction points, things that they ran into. And so if you want to take a look at the proposal for 114 work, it is basically a rundown addressing many of the issues people have encountered. So this is one proposal that kind of enumerates several distinct evolutions in the design, specifically around how you can target objects, both by label and by scope, and then a few items about how you call out to the webhooks, being able to target additional deployment mechanisms on localhost, relaxing restrictions on ports when targeting services, and shortening the timeout when you call out to a webhook. Right now, the timeout defaults to 30 seconds and is non-configurable. And there was feedback that in some cases that is too long, and people would like the option to cinch that down shorter to say, time me out much sooner than that, like on the order of
like fixed seconds.
1 to 10 seconds. Yeah. There were a couple other things in there that I wanted to mention. Sorry.
Oh, sure.
So it was object selection, interactions with the webhook, with an eye towards moving this to V1, along with moving the registration objects to V1, we would move the admission review object that gets sent to and received from the webhook to V1. And so having a way for webhooks to indicate what versions of admission review objects they could accept. And then the API server would send the first one in the webhooks list that the API server knew how to send.
So are we going to fix the problem where you have to register for every possible way of talking about an object?
That is distinct from the version of the envelope object that you get.
Yes.
That is a good open question that is not in this list and should be. So we will add that to the set of open questions. I don't think it impacts any of these items, but it is a good question.
It's a really poor experience right now.
Yeah, I can. Yeah, let's add it to that, and we'll iterate.
Depending on how it's done, it may change the way registration works if you auto-convert, for instance.
Yeah, it's an important thing to address before going GA, I think, because it'll be much harder to fix.
We'd want to know.
And that's why my comment said to give Daniel his chance.
Nobody disagreed. And then the last, we're not even close to the end. If we're grouping these logically, the next two would probably be what information gets sent to admission webhooks. So there have been requests to see option information along with requests. So as we start to have more robust interactions like preconditions on delete or dry run for the mutating operations, seeing the information, sort of the metadata around the request is useful. And so adding or surfacing the options that were submitted along with the mutating request to the webhook makes sense. Another request has been to see the existing object as part of a deletion admission. So when you delete an object, letting the admission webhook see the object that is going to be deleted. That's actually been a long-standing request, even for in-tree admission plugins. Some of the in-tree ones do kind of wacky things to work around not having that information available. And we did something similar for update. The way the update admission hook is run, it has access to the existing object. And so this would be getting parity for delete. And then the last, it's not last on the list, but the final item is addressing the plugin ordering problem. And so this is, this first came to light with interactions between in-tree and out-of-tree plugins. So some in-tree plugins modify or default fields inside containers to do things like enforce running at specific UIDs or using specific image pool policies. But those are just sort of particular examples of a general class of admission plugin that applies defaulting and then requires compliance with specific values. That interacted poorly with a later plugin that tried to add a new container, for example. And so if you had one plugin that said, my image pool policy must be X, and then later, and it would enforce that by setting the image pool policy to X. And then later, another plugin injected a new container. You would encounter failures. And so there was quite a bit of discussion, both in the linked issue and the past week or so, as we got a set of people together to talk through all the different options. And the two proposed solutions generally came down to try to define an order among all plugins that works, or give mutating plugins a second shot at an object if there are mutations in the first pass. Defining an order sounds simple and reasonable until you actually try it. First of all, it's not even possible always to order plugins. Sometimes one plugin will make two different changes, and one of those changes needs to run before something, and one of those changes needs to run after something. And so you kind of run into this granularity problem where you start having to break down every plugin into one individual change and then try to order them totally across the total order. So even just getting to a spot where they could be ordered is not easy. And then once you're there, assuming that the cluster administrator, who's the one responsible for sorting out this mishmash of plugins, knows enough about all the interactions between them to pick an order that will work, in our experience, has not proven true. Even with the in-tree plugins that didn't have that many strange interactions, there were a couple, even with just that set of in-tree plugins, when the order was specified by the cluster administrator, they often got it wrong, which is why we moved to this recommended order for in-tree plugins. Administrator just says, I want these on or off, and we put them in the right order for them. Reintroducing that ordering problem, or putting that back in the cluster administrator's plate for admission webhook did not seem workable.
One thing that's not on this list and is relevant to that, and if you refresh the page, I just added 2 comments. One thing is a webhook allowed to mutate a field that a user specifically set to a given value. And the follow-up question is if webhook A changes a field and then webhook B wants to change the same field, do we specifically support that?
So yes, we can change a field that a user has specified. We do that today. If you look at something like the image pull policy,
yes, that in fact, I think it was Brian made the assertion to me that we shouldn't be doing this, and I looked in like the very first hook on the very first plugin on the list does this. So, but you know, just because it's there doesn't mean it should be there.
I guess. Okay, I guess I would be disinclined to change that behavior for webhooks. You're talking about changing it overall and removing plugins that do?
I mean, if we take the position that no two webhooks can change the same field, then we shouldn't ever have this problem, right?
No. So the problem that we ran into was actually things that were changing different fields, but at different structural levels. So I think it was Istio was injecting a container.
Mm-hmm. I see.
And some other plugin was defaulting a field and requiring fields on a particular container to be set to a particular value. And so it wasn't actually two plugins that had different opinions about the same field. If you have two plugins that have different opinions about the same field, yeah, you're not going to have a good time.
Run that way.
No, hang on. I mean, I get the case you're thinking of, but even something like the image policy and Istio, right? If you wanted to say, look, I want to make sure that I pull Istio from my repository, not where the default Istio plugin assigns it when it sets up the container, I think is actually a pretty valid use case and involves two plugins modifying what amounts to the same field.
Yeah, the first class is opinions about different fields. I think that is clearly an issue today, and we should enable that interaction and not require the cluster administrator to specifically order things to get that interaction working.
Yeah, we probably shouldn't design this here, but one thing that occurs to me is we can actually look at what plugins do, like what fields do they actually change after the fact, because we have the thing that we sent to them and we have the thing that they sent back. We could potentially form some sort of a graph of what changes what and run them in the correct order automatically.
No, because you don't necessarily know what went into the decision that plugin made.
Yeah. If you had sent it something different, would it have modified something differently? Yeah.
Yes.
All right, so it sounds like this one needs further discussion. Should we keep going?
That was the last one on the list. So that is the set of feedback from users that seemed tractable to work on addressing in the 114 timeframe. There were a couple requests that we discussed and either didn't think should be done or we're going to defer decisions on. So that was splitting out references from the trust bundle in the webhook config to a separate object, making it no longer be a self-contained configuration, but sort of spreading it across multiple objects. There were some pros to that, some cons to that. It wasn't clear that it was significantly better. And then the second item was trying to change or improve or make more dynamic the methods for telling API servers how they authenticate to admission webhooks.
Gotcha. Yeah, it looks like there's references to both these here if anybody wants to read more.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Should we move on? It looks like the next one is CRD pruning defaulting.
Yeah, I didn't really plan to discuss this a lot. This was more, this got opened, moved to the kept format. I would like to see this discussion start back up and try to get resolved in the 114 timeframe so that whatever implementation is going to come out of that is ready to go the beginning of 1.15, just to so we can make progress on getting custom resources moving forward. So not this week, but in the next weeks, try to take a look at that if you're interested or have opinions, and we can try to set up some meeting times for people who are engaging in the conversation to get some higher bandwidth discussion on that.
Okay, so that's for future. So we'll bring this back up again in the next cycle and make sure that we talk about it before we pass our deadline. Okay, it sounds like the next thing we wanted to talk about was the status of server-side apply.
Yeah, I had a question about that. As of a couple days ago, Monday maybe, I went back, looked at the pull, and I still didn't see the CRD pieces. Have those landed?
Yeah, I pushed them yesterday maybe.
Ah, okay.
And I CC'd you on the issue this morning because I was happy with the status.
Okay. Sorry, I did not notice. I will swing back by and check. And I guess this is a good reminder. We had agreed not to let this pull linger. So if you're interested, go and read.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm reviewing it right now.
Okay. Yeah, I took a pass before, and it matched what I was expecting to see. I just wanted to see the CRD implementation come in.
Okay.
I think
just a reminder, it'd probably be helpful to make sure there is somewhere that has kind of example, like what does this look like in practice? So if it's in the description of that, or in, I guess, the doc for it, or somewhere, just
that specifically that reproduces the exact output that we expect.
Yeah, just like you take an object and you apply it with this feature in place. What does it look like? What does it look like after a controller messes with it?
Yeah, test that does that now in the PR.
Okay.
I also plan to update the cap. I think it's a little out of date at this point.
Understatement.
Okay, is there anything else on server-side apply?
That was my only comment.
Great.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. Okay, I think that's the end of our scheduled agenda. Did anybody else have anything they wanted to mention to the group or bring up real quick? A few minutes.
I mean, while we have, if there's nothing else, sorry, I will wait until there's nothing else.
I think you're welcome to it.
Okay. While we have people here, I would love to kind of talk through some of the questions from that first item. Like I said, we're trying to sketch out the 114 stuff, and there's a desire to have work scoped by the end of this week. Not necessarily every design point nailed down, but at least understanding what we're going to do. So if people who are interested want to stay and can, I'd love to talk through some of those.
Okay. Yeah, I guess then what we'll do is we'll conclude the main meeting, and anybody who would like to stay and discuss, please stick around.
I will stop the recording. Thank you, everybody. Not going to stay.
Great. Thank you.